I never expected my friend's mom to notice how nervous I was, but when she leaned closer and whispered she'd help me relax, everything inside me changed. The first time I stepped into that house, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I had been there countless times before, usually with my friend beside me, the two of us laughing, talking too loud, making the place feel full of noise and youth. But this afternoon was different. He wasn't home yet, and for the first time, it was just me and her. His mother greeted me at the door. She was exactly as I remembered her, elegant, calm, her movements unhurried in a way that immediately made me conscious of my own restless energy. She was in her early 40s, though the way she carried herself gave her an aura beyond numbers, graceful posture, a soft but steady gaze, and a smile that felt both welcoming and quietly knowing. "Come in," she said warmly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I stepped inside, my shoes clicking lightly against the polished floor, and for some reason, I felt as though I had entered a space where the air itself was heavier, more deliberate. She reached out briefly, her hand brushing my arm as she guided me toward the living room. It was nothing, the most casual touch, but my body reacted before my mind had time to explain it. There was warmth there, a softness that lingered on my sleeve even after her hand had left. I felt suddenly aware of myself in a way I wasn't used to, how I was standing, how fast my heart was beating, how awkwardly my voice might sound if I spoke too soon. The living room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and something floral. Maybe her perfume, maybe the soft fragrance from the vase of lilies on the table. Either way, it surrounded me. She asked how I'd been, her voice calm and steady, the kind of voice that makes you want to answer honestly rather than hide behind quick, shallow replies. I found myself studying her, trying not to be obvious. The small lines near her eyes only seemed to make her more striking, as if every smile and sorrow had etched a story there. She carried herself with confidence, but there was also something gentler underneath, something that made me feel safe, even while I was unreasonably nervous. I sat down, still unsettled by how different this felt compared to every other time I'd visited. Without my friend's laughter filling the room, the silence was noticeable, not uncomfortable, but weighted. For the first time, I realized how much space she occupied just by being there. And as she sat across from me, her eyes meeting mine with an ease I didn't share, I caught myself wondering, why did it suddenly feel like the air between us held more than just polite conversation? She led me into the kitchen, the kind of place that always felt lived in, warm. The late afternoon light came through the wide window, spilling across the counter, and I noticed how it lit up the small details, the framed photographs tucked in corners, the half-empty mug left near the sink, the faint scent of cinnamon lingering from something she must have baked earlier. It wasn't just a room, it carried her presence in a way that felt unmistakable. She set down a plate of biscuits in front of me, smiling as though it were the most natural gesture in the world. "You look like you haven't eaten all day," she teased gently, sliding into the chair opposite mine. I gave a nervous laugh, brushing it off, but the truth was she wasn't wrong. My appetite had been caught somewhere between the soft weight of her voice and the way her eyes lingered on me just a little too long. My leg bounced under the table, restless energy I couldn't quite control. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. Tilting her head, her lips curved into the kind of smile that wasn't just kind, but slightly playful, as if she'd caught me in a secret I hadn't meant to share. "You look nervous," she said, her tone light but edged with something more deliberate. The words landed gently, but they stirred something inside me, the way only certain truths can. I tried to protest, to laugh it off, but before I could, she reached across the table. Her hand rested lightly on mine, her fingers pressing just enough to still the movement. It was nothing dramatic, just a touch. Yet it carried weight. Her skin was soft, her hand warm, and in that small contact, the rest of the world seemed to fade back. My throat tightened, and though she let go a second later, the impression remained, as if her touch had etched itself into me. She leaned back casually, as though she hadn't just sent my pulse racing. "There," she said with a faint smile. "Better." The playful tone made it seem harmless, but the knowing look in her eyes told me she was well aware of the effect she had. She wasn't mocking me, she was watching me carefully, as if trying to measure what I would do with the moment she'd created. I found myself smiling back, though awkwardly, unable to shake the heat rising in my chest. Somehow, her presence made me both restless and calm, nervous yet oddly safe. And as she reached for her own cup of tea, her fingers brushing the handle with the same unhurried grace she seemed to bring into every movement, I realized something unsettling. She wasn't just filling the silence with words. She was pulling me into a rhythm that was entirely her own, and I was already falling into it without resistance. The minutes passed, and still, my friend hadn't returned. What had started as small talk over tea slowly stretched into something else, something I hadn't expected. It wasn't just conversation anymore. It felt like a doorway opening into a quieter, more personal part of her world. She asked about my studies, my work, where I saw myself in the years ahead. At first, I answered lightly, but her gaze held me steady. She listened in a way that made me realize how often people don't really listen at all. With her, silence wasn't pressure, it was space to think, to be honest. When I asked about her, she hesitated for a moment. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup, her eyes lowered briefly as if considering whether she should share. And then she did. She spoke about the weight of responsibilities, about how quickly the years had slipped through her hands. Not bitterly, just with a soft kind of acceptance, the way someone speaks when they've made peace with the past, even if it left a mark. Her voice carried a gentleness, but underneath it was a note of vulnerability that caught me off guard. I wasn't used to seeing her that way. Around my friend, she was always composed, always the steady center of the household. But here, with just the two of us, she allowed something more fragile to show. "I suppose," she said quietly, "we all have moments we wish we could live again. Not to change them, but just to feel them once more." Her words lingered in the air. I didn't know what to say at first, but I felt the weight of them, and somehow, I wanted to carry it with her. I told her I understood, about mischances, about how sometimes the things we want most are the ones we're too afraid to reach for. She looked up then, and the way her eyes softened made my chest tighten. A small smile curved her lips. She reached up absent-mindedly to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the movement simple but strangely intimate in the quiet between us. Her gaze didn't drift away this time, it held mine, steady and unguarded. That look, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't obvious. But it was enough to stir something deep in me. It was as if, for a brief moment, the careful distance of years and roles blurred, and what remained was just two people sharing pieces of themselves they rarely revealed. And in that stillness, I felt it, an invisible thread tightening, pulling us closer without a single step taken. By the time the clock ticked past another quarter hour, it was clear my friend wasn't coming back any time soon. I shifted in my chair, trying to hide the restless energy buzzing through me. I told myself it was nothing, just the awkwardness of being left alone with her, but my body betrayed me. My shoulders felt tight, my voice caught in my throat, and every small silence seemed to magnify the sound of my heartbeat. She noticed. Of course she noticed. "You're tense," she said lightly, her tone playful but observant, as though she could read the truth I was trying to disguise. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, amusement flickering in them. "You really do look nervous." I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could, she leaned closer across the small table, her voice lowering just enough to feel personal. "I'll help you relax." The words were simple. Yet the way she said them carried more weight than their letters should hold. A gentle tease, yes, but also something that sent a current straight through me. She rose from her chair, carrying the teapot to refill my cup, but when she returned, she didn't sit across from me again. Instead, she slid gracefully into the chair beside mine. The movement was unhurried, intentional, as though she wanted me to notice. Her presence at my side shifted the air immediately. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral and warm, wrapped around me. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the nearness of her. As she set the cup in front of me, her knee brushed against mine under the table. It could have been an accident. It should have been an accident. But she didn't move it away. The light pressure remained, steady and unspoken, as though she was testing how much space I would allow her to share. I froze, caught between instinct and curiosity. My hand tightened slightly on the cup, the porcelain warm against my fingers. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her faint smile, the kind that held both amusement and something more delicate, like she enjoyed my reaction but wasn't pushing too far. "You're always so serious," she teased softly. "You don't need to be." Her tone was kind, but her eyes lingered. I tried to laugh, but the sound came out uneven, and she noticed that too. She always noticed. In that moment, the world outside the kitchen seemed to fade, the ticking clock, the distant traffic, everything but her nearness. And though she hadn't done anything more than pour tea and brush her knee against mine, it felt as though a line had been quietly, deliberately redrawn between us. The kitchen grew quiet after that, quiet in a way that made every sound sharper. The faint tick of the clock on the wall. The soft clink of her spoon as she stirred her tea, though she didn't seem in any rush to drink it. Even the steady rhythm of my own breathing felt loud to me, betraying how uneasy I was in her presence. But it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence. It was the kind that holds weight, that makes you feel as though something is about to be said, even if the words haven't formed yet. She leaned her elbow on the table, resting her chin lightly against her hand, and looked at me with that same calm patience she always carried. But there was something softer now, something more searching in her gaze. "Tell me," she said finally, her voice quiet, "why do you always look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders?" I swallowed hard, caught off guard. No one had ever asked me that, not like this, not with such genuine curiosity. I hesitated, then admitted the truth, that I wasn't good at talking to women, that most of the time I felt clumsy, uncertain, unsure of what they really saw in me. Her expression shifted, tender in a way that made my chest tighten. She didn't laugh, didn't brush it aside. She just nodded, as though my words had reached a part of her that understood. "Most men your age," she said softly, "pretend to have all the answers. But I think there's strength in admitting you don't." As she spoke, she leaned slightly closer, her eyes never leaving mine. The warmth in them was disarming. Then, without warning, her hand lifted, just a small, casual gesture, and she reached across the space between us. Her fingers brushed the edge of my collar, smoothing it gently. A simple act, nothing more. Yet the way her fingertips grazed the side of my neck, just below my jaw, sent a shiver through me. My breath caught, and for a moment I couldn't move. She withdrew her hand slowly, almost reluctantly, and smiled faintly as if nothing unusual had happened. But the air between us was no longer the same. That single touch had left a trail of warmth that refused to fade. I stared at her, trying to find words, but none came. She didn't seem to need them. She simply sat back, her eyes holding mine with quiet certainty. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't dared admit until now. This wasn't just teasing anymore. This was something deeper, something fragile, unspoken, and dangerously real. The laughter from earlier had faded, and with it, the light teasing that once kept the atmosphere safe. What settled between us now was quieter, heavier. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it demanded honesty in a way that playful words could never cover. Her hand was still close to mine on the table, close enough that if either of us shifted even slightly, our fingers would touch. She didn't move, though, and neither did I. The stillness of that distance seemed to speak louder than any action. She broke the silence first. "You know," she said softly, her voice low, almost hesitant. "It's been a very long time since I've felt like someone was really listening to me. Not just hearing the words, but actually listening." The confession caught me off guard. This was a woman I'd always seen as steady, composed, someone who had everything under control. Yet here she was, admitting to a loneliness she rarely showed. Her eyes flickered down, then back to mine, as though testing whether I was someone she could trust with the truth. I leaned in slightly, my voice quieter than before. "I am listening." "More than you know." Something softened in her expression then, Something fragile that made her seem less like my friend's untouchable mother and more like a woman who longed, just like anyone else, to be seen. Her hand shifted, almost absent-mindedly, and this time she placed it over mine. Not briefly, not casually, but with intent. Her palm was warm, her fingers curling gently around mine. The simple pressure of her touch made my chest tighten, and I realized I didn't want her to let go. She looked at me, her thumb brushing once across my knuckles. "You make me feel." She paused, searching for the word. "You make me feel like I still matter. Do you understand what that means?" I couldn't speak right away. My throat felt dry, my heart pounding against my ribs. All I could do was nod, because the truth was, I did understand. Maybe not in the fullness of her years, but in the longing to be noticed, to be valued, not for appearances or roles, but for something deeper. Her eyes held mine, and for a long moment, the silence was enough. It wasn't heavy now, it was intimate. Shared. The kind of silence that comes when two people recognize something in each other that words would only ruin if spoken too soon. And in that stillness, with her hand wrapped around mine and her gaze steady on me, I knew the line between us had shifted again, this time not through teasing or playful touches, but through the quiet gravity of being truly seen. The sound of the front door still hadn't come, though I knew eventually it would. Time felt suspended, as if the two of us existed in a small, protected world that would vanish the moment anyone else stepped inside. Her hand was still over mine, steady, grounding. Neither of us had spoken in a while, but it didn't matter. Words had already done their part. What lingered now was the weight of presence, the silent understanding that something had shifted forever. Finally, she drew in a slow breath and let it out with a faint smile. "You really shouldn't be so nervous," she murmured. Her voice carried warmth, but beneath it was a softness that felt like an unspoken promise. Before I could answer, she stood, moving with her usual grace, and then leaned down. I expected her to step past me, but instead, she placed her arms gently around me. The hug caught me by surprise, not because it was sudden, but because of how deeply it sank into me. Her embrace wasn't quick or polite. It was firm, lasting, as though she meant for me to feel every ounce of reassurance she wanted to give. Her cheek rested lightly against my chest, and in that quiet closeness, I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. For a moment, I simply froze, afraid that even breathing too hard might break the spell. But then instinct overcame hesitation, and I let my arms circle her in return. She fit there naturally, her warmth dissolving the last of the tension I had carried all evening. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered, her words muffled slightly against me. "Don't forget that." The simple truth of it went deeper than any compliment I'd ever received. It wasn't flattery, it was belief. She was giving me something more lasting than her touch. She was giving me a part of herself that had been hidden behind her composure. When she finally drew back, her smile lingered, calm but tinged with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was restraint. Whatever it was, it stayed with me even as the space between us widened again. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. Reality was returning, inevitable and unrelenting. Yet as we exchanged one last glance, I knew we both carried something unspoken that wouldn't fade when the door opened. Her eyes met mine, steady and certain, and I realized the truth. What had passed between us wasn't just teasing, or chance, or fleeting nervousness. It was connection. Quiet, fragile, and undeniably real. And even as the front door finally opened, I carried the weight of that embrace, the steadiness of her heartbeat, the warmth of her words, knowing it had changed me in ways I couldn't yet explain.